There's about 1 billion meals served every year in California schools, and now California is banning ultra-processed foods. Our guest today is Bernadette Del Chiaro, who's been advocating for this law. She's here to tell us what is considered the ultra-processed food and why they're getting banned from schools.
Public schools in California are the largest fast food restaurant in the state. So we serve over 1 billion meals every year. And what California did was, for the first time, codify in legal language what is an ultra-processed food.
I'm Siamai Korami. Welcome to California Insider. The state just passed a law that you have been advocating for. Can you tell us what this means?
California, for the first time, really kind of the first state entity and national entity in the world, has taken the first step to define what is an ultra-processed food, and then to take steps to move it out of the lunch line, to get it out of our kids' food in our K through 12 public school system. This is maybe goes one step too deep, but it's really interesting. Most of us assume that the food, when you go into the grocery store, has been approved by the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration. And the truth is, we have a loophole in federal law. It's called the GRAS loophole. And it basically allows industry to declare a chemical additive safe unless it's proven otherwise. And the chemicals, there are thousands and thousands and thousands, and there's no way that the federal government can test every single one. So there's a presumption of safety. And these chemicals are known to cause really serious health problems: diabetes, learning disabilities, in some cases cancer, and they really do not belong in our food. And so what happens is they add these chemicals. Sometimes they're for preservatives, sometimes they're just to extend the shelf life of a frozen pizza, right, that you might serve, kids might get on the lunch tray. Sometimes they are the chemical additives that get added to preserved meats, hot dogs, chicken nuggets that really don't bear resemblance to meat anymore because they have so many chemicals put inside them. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, they are chemicals that are designed to trigger your brain's desire to eat that more. It makes you think, oh, I need to have more of that. Some of these chemicals make these bread products in particular last months and months. They'll sit on a shelf in a warehouse for months before they get delivered to our schools, and they don't mold. You know, if you buy a product that sits on a store shelf for months and months and doesn't mold, you know something's wrong with that product. It is not a natural product. That's not how natural food behaves. And so they're designed to have long shelf life. Sometimes they're designed to be soft and squishy, to just make it seem like it is more fun to eat. These are all qualities that are actually mimicking in some cases, but in other cases totally foreign to natural food and to wholesome food. And, you know, we're not saying get rid of Ho-Hos or Twinkies. Like, people can still go have their guilty pleasures. What we're saying is we should not be spending millions and millions of dollars providing that kind of food to our kids.
As someone reporting on California's economy and policies every week, unfortunately, I see the middle class shrinking in California. Some of it has to do with our policies, and there is another side to this, that we are facing major inflation here and across the country. Unfortunately, the dollar has lost 10% of its value just this year to date. That's why more and more people are turning to real assets to protect their financial future, like physical gold and silver from American Hardfold Gold. Unlike paper assets, these tangible investments can't be controlled or devalued by inflation or bad policies. You can have them delivered straight to your home or securely stored in a tax-advantaged gold IRA, giving you a safe, reliable way to safeguard your wealth, no matter what happens in California or the rest of the country. American Hardfold Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. And right now, when you call, you can get up to $15,000 in free silver with your first purchase. Call 866-595-2304. That's 866-595-2304. Or text Cali to 65532. Beat the system and protect your wealth with something real today. What's the impact on costs for something like this?
You know, first of all, our public schools in California are the largest fast food restaurant in the state. So we serve over 1 billion meals every year and through our K through 12, both the breakfast and the lunch line. And so it's a huge amount of food that flows through our public schools. And what the schools that have made this transition away from unhealthy food toward healthy food have found is that they can save money, they can get more kids eating more of the healthy food, and the kids are happier. So it actually has no impact. If anything, it's a positive impact on the school's bottom line. And of course, it improves the outcomes of the kids. The kids learn better, do better on test scores when they're eating wholesome food. And it's ultimately getting California pointed in the right direction. The bill we passed, AB 1264, actually garnered the support of California farmers because we're a unique state in that we basically grow all sorts of wholesome food, from nuts to dairy to cheese to grains. And those foods can go straight to the lunch line. And the farmers in California want to see that sort of farm to lunch line connection strengthened instead of importing food from half the country away that's been sitting on a warehouse shelf somewhere.
You mentioned the schools that have implemented this are saving money. Can you explain how?
When you buy cheap food, junk food, you tend to buy a lot of it. You don't actually save money when you do an analysis. It might seem like it's cheaper on a per unit basis, but you end up eating more of it or buying more of it than you otherwise would. Whereas when you buy and eat wholesome food, healthier food, you're actually satiated and you don't eat as much and you're happier. So one of the school districts I spoke to that came to the Capitol to lobby for the bill, they provided hamburgers every other week, once every other week instead of on a weekly basis. But the hamburgers were organic meat and the buns were made by a local bakery and the kids loved them. And so the kids didn't notice, oh, this is now once every other week. They just looked forward to when it was hamburger day. Whereas I can tell you, I have 2 kids in public school myself. When it's hamburgers, they joke. It's like not real meat. It doesn't taste normal. It tastes gross. You know, it's like a joke on the school lunch line. Oh gosh, it's chicken nugget day. Oh, gross. I'm going to get something else. You know, like the kids know what tastes good and what doesn't taste good. And so the schools that have made this switch, that have made this proactive switch before this bill was passed to consciously provide healthier, better tasting food, have found more kids come to the lunch line, buy the lunch, and they're spending less money and making more money at the same time. So it's been positive for these schools on a financial point of view.
So more kids have been buying.
Yeah, more kids will buy the hot lunch instead of bringing their own lunch because it's actually really good food.
You mentioned ultra-processed, so you had to define this term. Some critics say that this is a very risky thing because you could cut a lot of things out.
Yeah, it's really important to get the details right in public policy. And what California did was, for the first time, codify in legal language what is an ultra-processed food. And that wasn't an easy task. What we ended up doing is defining ultra-processed food as being a food that is high in fat, sugar, or salt. So one of those 3 high amounts of ingredients, and that's in the statute. How do we define high? But high in fat, sugar, or salt, and contains one of these chemicals that the federal government lists, even though they list and allow them in the food. So a chemical in the food, in addition to high in fat, sugar, or salt, makes something an ultra-processed food. So what's important to note is peanut butter is a processed food. There's lots and lots of processed foods in our diet today. And you can even eat some ultra-processed foods, but especially processed foods can be part of a healthy diet. Again, peanut butter, yogurt, even breads. Most breads are ultimately processed in some way or other. So it's not so much the processing, it's the ultra part of it that we wanted to define, and then from there regulate to minimize in our diet. And so what the bill, AB 1264, by Southern California Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, what it does is it defines ultra-processed food the way I just described it. And then it goes one step further, and it asks the California Department of Public Health to then, from this gigantic list and class of foods called ultra-processed foods that we've now defined, which are the worst of the worst, and those are the ones that we're going to get out of school lunches. So the ones that have the worst chemicals in them that do the most damage to the human body, or the ones that are the highest in the fat and the sugar and the salt, and that are leading to diabetes and overweight problems and other issues like that. Let's get those phased out and banned from school lunches. So the bill sets up a framework and then takes that concrete step that the schools will eventually have to abide by.
This is a broad definition, right? Was there categories that you guys missed and then you realized that you're cutting some big things out?
Yeah, in the early versions of the bill, people always joke about legislation being like making sausage, right? And usually that phrase or that terminology is sort of meant in a negative way. But legislation done right, going through the committee processes, listening to all the different stakeholders, can actually really improve the piece of legislation to make it do what it's intended to do. So one of the early versions of the bill, we inadvertently captured chemicals or additives, food additives, that nobody would really think or would be concerned about. So one example was apples. Most orchards, when they pick the apple, they spray the apples with a wax, and oftentimes that comes from bees, just beeswax. So this is something I hadn't really previously realized, but once I thought about it, you can sometimes even scrape off, you can feel a film on your apple. So that's beeswax. Some of us may not want to eat beeswax. It's not very good tasting, but it's not the chemicals and the additives that we're really concerned about. And so we had to adjust the definition to make sure that we were not capturing additives, food additives, that are actually not the ones that scientists are the most concerned with. And so that's how we landed on that definition of high in fat, sugar, or salt, and then specific chemicals. And then there are things like surface emulsifiers like beeswax that are exempted out.
This bill was pretty popular. Can you tell us what was the process like?
This bill was really quite special in terms of just how strong the bipartisan support was for it. I have to give credit to the author, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel. From the very get-go, he invited two legislators from kind of polar ends of the political spectrum in the California State Assembly to be his primary co-authors. So he, invited them, will you come and do this bill with me, essentially. And those two assembly members, one was James Gallagher, who is the Republican leader for the California State Assembly. And then the other was assembly member from the Silicon Valley region, who is on the sort of furthest left and one of the youngest, Alex Lee, one of the youngest assembly members in the assembly. And so these two, assembly member Lee and assembly member Gallagher, don't typically appear on the same bill, but they both enthusiastically said, yes, I'd like to co-author. This is an issue I'm concerned with. And that's because our legislators in our democracy that does still work are responsive to their constituents. And what we are finding is that Americans across the political spectrum, across geographic demographics, are really increasingly aware of our food and of other products, and that there are chemicals and toxins in our food and our water and other products that are causing us harm. That there's a reason why we have a cancer epidemic in this country. There's a reason why we have increasing issues around immune system dysfunction. There's a reason why we're having more and more kids with diabetes that otherwise do not present the typical characteristics of somebody with diabetes. We have a problem in this country, and more Americans are waking up to that. And they're telling their legislators, do something about this. And that's bubbling up from the grassroots, and it's on the left and it's on the right. And so we're finding almost this horseshoe alliance of left and right coming together, and that really was embodied in this bill, of that broad support. In the end, when this bill was voted on, the final vote in both the Assembly and the Senate, we had 119 yes votes and 1 no vote. So out of 120 legislators, only 1 legislator voted no, and the other all voted yes, which is almost unheard of. Usually you have a lot of no's, you have a lot of abstentions, and then you have hopefully enough yeses to pass the bill. This was almost unanimous. And again, I think it comes from, we're in this moment. I think actually the COVID pandemic contributed to this. I think the internet is contributing. People have access to information they didn't previously have at their fingertips. And I think people are just becoming more aware and more concerned. And they're just looking around and they're seeing a problem and they're looking for answers. And I think it's a no-brainer that we should not be putting, most of us think we should not be putting these untested, unproven to be safe chemicals into our bodies.
How long does it take for this bill to get implemented in the school system?
So we are giving the schools a good amount of time to make this adjustment because we want to make sure that this doesn't cause any kind of disruptions. It's important for kids to be fed at our schools. It's going to take about 1.5 years for the Department of Public Health to define what is that ultra-processed food of concern that we're going to ban. And then we give the school districts, food vendors, a couple of years until it really will start phasing in 2029 through 2032 for a complete phase out. And eventually it's going to address food that's in the traditional lunch line, food that's in what's called the a la carte, where you can go buy a bag of chips. And then it's also going to affect the vending machines at our kids' schools so that our kids don't have these cheap, addicting foods right at their fingertips so easily while they're at school.
So what are the kind of foods that are not going to be in the schools anymore? Can you tell us which ones are going to be gone?
Well, it's hard for me to say for sure because the Department of Public Health has to go through their scientific review process to determine which are those chemicals and those ultra-processed foods of the greatest concern. So I'd be getting out ahead of the scientists, but you can be pretty sure we will see a phase out of the types of ultra-preserved, ultra-processed bread products will be gone. That doesn't mean kids aren't going to have pizza. Actually, pizza is one of the easiest foods that you can make, and you can make it with real wholesome bread products and real wholesome dairy products and tomatoes. I mean, there's great ingredients that can go into pizza. It's just not going to be that microwave pocket type pizza. And again, kids know the difference. It doesn't quite taste like food. And they know that. And when they eat real pizza, they're like, oh, now that's real pizza. And it makes them happy. So that's what we're going to that's what we're transitioning away from. You know, there are certain processed meats we probably will just stop serving. Some of the worst pepperoni on that pizza, you know, that doesn't need to be there in order for that pizza to taste good. So it's just about making better choices. Chips, soda, you know, the kind of peanut butter that comes chock full of sugar, in addition to hydrogenated oils, you know, things that get added to peanuts. Peanuts grounded all by themselves are a wonderful snack, but when you add in the extra chemicals and the extra ingredients, that's what makes it really unhealthy. So that's the type of thing we're going to phase out of our kids' lunches.
Before we move on to the rest of this interview, let's take a look at some of the key headlines in the California section of Epoch Times. Cartels are taking over Northern California tribal land, and they're imposing narco-slavery. The sheriff of Mendocino County, who we interviewed on this story, has only 6 deputies, and he's in charge of 3,500 miles of territory to cover. Proposition 50, which was highly debated and it will allow redistricting in California, passed by a wide margin. Over 63% of Californians voted yes on this proposition. There's a new ballot initiative in California that's going to bar state lawmakers who voted yes on Prop 50 from running for office for 10 years. This ballot initiative is just got approved. They're starting to get signatures for it. Coachella mayor was indicted on the conflict of interest charges. It's not very clear what these charges are yet, but it's due to some of his votes with development projects in city of Coachella. Epoch Times is a very unique newspaper. It started because of human rights issues in China. We cover a lot of things nationally, internationally, and our reporters take risks. As an example, the cartels influence growing in California, our reporters take risks to go into the field to find out what's exactly happening, to report it so we can help the community. Make sure to subscribe to the paper, click on the link below. You can get it for $1 a week. And let us know what you think of the paper. Now let's move on to the rest of this interview. Do you think passing something like this was harder a decade ago?
It was absolutely harder a decade ago. We are in a moment right now where there was widespread understanding that our food isn't safe and that the government isn't quite doing what people expect the government to do. Again, I think most people previously walked into the grocery store and assumed everything has been tested and has been proven safe, and like, the drugs you take, all these things, you think it's all regulated. And when most people wake up and realize that there's these loophole in the law that allows these chemicals to be added to our food without being tested and without being proven safe, and that it's basically an epidemic of this problem, then they just demand change. And I think that's what we're seeing in California, and we're seeing it take off across the country. So we now have dozens of states that have introduced similar legislation to California's ultra-processed food ban, similar to when we passed the ban to get rid of food dyes. We saw multiple states all across the country, and these are like Louisiana, Texas, West Virginia. This is a left-right coalition that is bubbling up from the state level. It's not just individual voters that are left and right. We're seeing it manifest itself in state politics of these very red states that are actually passing stronger laws than California. It's sort of a race to the top, which I rejoice in, because I think that's what representative democracy is supposed to be, right? You're supposed to see politicians step forward eager to do what the voters want them to do.
There's a movement nationally on this with the MAHA, Make Americans Healthy Again. Is that connected? Is what you guys are doing connected to that, or is it separate because it's California?
Oh, no. I mean, MAHA, what I think is so interesting about the MAHA movement is that it is absolutely a grassroots movement. It is coming from the bottom up. It's coming from people who are, like I said earlier, increasingly aware that something isn't quite right with our food and also with our water and with our air. These people want to see aggressive action taken to make our food and our water and our air and our products and our everyday life safer. And so this movement, I think, largely got started. I'm sure some will argue it predated the COVID pandemic, but it did kind of grow out of that time period when people were home, people were paying attention more to what they were eating and what they were doing. And people sort of started to realize that maybe we should question more. And I think that's what helped build up this grassroots movement, traditionally on the right, but really it's almost indistinguishable from a very long-standing movement on the left of people being concerned about toxic chemicals. You can't really tell the difference anymore. And I think that's so interesting because we spend too much time dividing our country into left and right. And what we really are is we're a bunch of moms, we're a bunch of dads, we're a bunch of people that want to see our air clean and want our water clean and want our food to be safe. That's all. It's pretty straightforward. And so politicians that step forward and sort of side with the people are going to get the type of support that they're looking for from the voter. And so that's what we've seen, and that's what I think we saw in this vote on AB 1264. I think most politicians that voted for that bill felt really good about doing it because they knew they were doing the right thing. They were doing something that was going to make their constituents happy on both the left and the right. And then, of course, it's nice to be part of history and to do something sort of brave, like California just did, and being the first to actually define and regulate ultra-processed foods.
Bernadette, how did you get involved with this?
So I work for the Environmental Working Group, and for over 30 years, my organization has been partnering with scientists to basically take a close look at our environment, inform consumers, and then push our policymakers to get the worst of the worst toxic pollutants, chemicals out of our diets and out of our consumer products of all sorts. And, ultra-processed food, we've been working for a very long time on food additives. One of the first big recent bills that we did with Assemblymember Gabriel that I mentioned that ran the ultra-processed food was a bill to ban some of the worst food dyes. It was referred to by our opponents as the Skittle ban, but of course Skittles are still available on every single store shelf and they're still as brightly colored as before. They just don't contain some of the most dangerous food dyes that they previously did because Jesse Gabriel stepped forward and passed a law to ban it. And so we've been working on this problem of our food and what gets added to our food and how to get government to be more responsive to protecting the public for quite some time. And this, is a natural culmination to start to work on this whole class now of food called ultra-processed foods. It's just sort of a continuation of the work we've been doing for decades.
How much opposition did you guys face? So the legislature, everybody was on board. Did you face a lot of opposition from the industry? Because they probably have optimized this process of delivering foods and probably they brought the cost down. What was it like?
We did face a lot of opposition from the food manufacturers, the manufacturers that make ultra-processed foods. And that's for two reasons. One is they're making money off of selling ultra-processed foods. I mean, it's pretty straightforward why they would be opposed to a ban on their product. And I think the other reason is because we always see extra fierce opposition in California because we are such a big state, and where we go, so goes the nation. And so if California sort of falls, if you will, you're going to see a domino effect across the country. And not only that, but the vendors are national in scope, many of them. And so if they change their formulation, their menu offerings for California, oftentimes you'll see them change it for nearby states as well because of just the economies of scale in their distribution plans. So the manufactured food companies were very, very opposed to this bill, and they fought very hard. And you can sort of see that in how many committees the bill had to go through. The bill had to go through multiple committees, each side of the chambers, in both chambers. And that's sort of in part because of all of that opposition. So while the votes all ended up very strong, it was actually a slog to get that bill to the finish line because of that opposition. And now those companies are working in Washington, D.C. to try to preempt all of this activity. And they're trying to get members of Congress to introduce legislation to basically say states can't regulate these things. States can't go out on their own and regulate food. They have to follow the federal government only. And so it's a preemption law, and it's a big fight that we're gearing up for right now so that we can protect the ability for states to protect their own population. It's a really important principle, and somewhat ironic that it is actually some of the members of Congress on the right that are introducing these legislations, because you'd think the philosophy on the right would be freedom and states' rights. And what we're seeing is those manufacturers, very deep-pocketed, very influential companies, getting in underneath and trying to promote this idea of preemption to undo everything that we have just accomplished and are accomplishing.
Is it possible for these companies to change their products?
Absolutely, it's possible. You know, if you go to Europe or you go to Japan, South Korea, all of these countries, you can find packaged foods. You can find processed foods. All of those foods are made within the confines of limitations on food chemicals and food additives. Chemists can do amazing things. They don't have to add the worst chemicals to food to make food taste good. Our manufacturers can do amazing things with food. And this whole idea, again, of let's eat more wholesome, let's eat more fresh food, this is something that humans have known for a very long time, and it is not going to be difficult for us to make this transition. So some of it is we'll eat less packaged food. That's a good thing. We'll eat more of those apples. That's a good thing. And then some of it is they'll just make the similar products without all of those chemicals filled in.
How much business is this for the food manufacturers?
It is big business. This is what is so shocking, is when you really step back and you look at how much food is passing through California's public schools. It is really big business. It's a lot of food and a lot of money. And it's a lot of tax dollars as a result. And that, I think, was one of the main motivations for a lot of politicians, is realizing that we're spending tax dollars on bad food. And that needs to stop.
How do these schools, so you mentioned this bill is intending to ban ultra-processed foods. How do the schools get their food supply now?
So there are a few schools in California that have really gone the extra mile, and they have what's called a scratch kitchen. And that just means it's a kitchen where they make food from scratch every day for their kids. And that's amazing. The school that we...
Public ones?
Yeah, these are public schools. Buchanan Middle School is where we did the bill signing in middle of Los Angeles. Beautiful, newly renovated school where the school district, being motivated by this idea that what we feed our kids affects their learning, affects health outcomes, they actually designed into this renovated school and remodeled school a scratch kitchen. Just beautiful, big, refrigerators full of apples and bananas. And I mean, it just looks like Martha Stewart, came in and set up the food display. Really, really good food is being served there. That's not the common, though. Common is where my kids go to school in Sacramento, and they have more of a kitchen where they just sort of prepare the pre-prepared meals. So the meals come sort of ready for just quick reheating and then serving. And those are all delivered by food services, and they're called vendors. And they basically decide what the meal's going to be in advance, and they deliver these sort of prepackaged meals. And the food service workers at our schools are not, making chili from scratch. They're just sort of preparing and serving what's already been, made for the school. And it's that ladder, which is much more common in California. That's where you sort of get this conveyor belt of ultra-processed foods because of that type of system. But what's important is you can back out, again, some of the worst and still maintain that sort of efficient food system. You don't have to go all the way to the scratch kitchen in order to comply with this law. We'd love everybody to go back to the good old days of wholesome food being cooked by the lunch lady. This is, I think, where California is headed ultimately. But not all of our schools have that kind of physical infrastructure at this point in time. And that's going to have to be a long-term renovation that we do and we put into our schools to make sure that we're providing more wholesome, locally grown food. In the meantime, what AB 1264 does is it just gets rid of the worst of the worst. And we still hold out those Buchanan middle schools as the shining star on the hill. But what we just want is, for sure, let's not, of those billion meals we're serving to our kids, let's make sure it's not the worst of the worst that is known to cause health harms.
So you've been working on this for many years. Your organization has been working on this for many years. Was there a moment in this process introducing this bill you thought is not going to go through?
I'll be honest with you. Usually when you introduce a big new idea, you don't pass it in 1 year. You usually 2 to 3 years for something this big. Usually organizations like ours, we obviously would all love to pass these big, far-reaching bills in 1 year because we believe in what we're doing and there's urgency behind it. But usually you don't expect it. And so absolutely, when we started out this year with this bill, we did not know for sure that it would get even out of the first house. The opposition was really stiff and powerful, and a lot of people had a lot of questions. And as I mentioned earlier, there were details that we had to get right. And there were a lot of farmers that got brought on board in opposition. So one of the things that the opposition did, the manufacturers, is they went to the farmers and they sort of riled the farming community up and got the farming community to all just pile on in opposition to the bill. Some of it was legitimate, like the beeswax example, and some of it wasn't really. And we just needed to massage things and calm people down and make them realize that we're going to work. We want to work with farmers. Farmers are our allies in the food system, but that it's a common tactic that you try to build a coalition with others to try to tank a bill, right? So they tried to pile on. So yeah, there was a time when we thought we weren't going to get the bill through. There was also a time there was a real risk that the legislature was going to insist that there be no definition of ultra-processed food in the bill. The bill just become kind of almost like a study bill, that the bill just say ultra-processed food in name only, but then just defer to a state agency to define what is an ultra-processed food and create that definition. Thankfully, and kudos to our author, Jesse Gabriel, who has a really strong sense of just the role of the different branches of government. And, not to get too civics lesson on us, but the legislature's job is to pass laws. And when you take that seriously, that means that you don't defer to state agencies to define major things like what is an ultra-processed food. You don't allow a state agency to create a legal definition. You, as the legislature, do that. And then you defer to the agency to get some of the implementation details right. And that is the right balance, right? If you want to figure out within the definition of ultra-processed foods, what are the ones that are the worst of the worst? That is a nuanced, detailed, science-led question that is the best to do to an agency that is full of scientists and that can, per the law, actually is required to team up with University of California scientists to help study this issue. So that's the kind of appropriate level of detail, of implementation detail to leave to a state agency. But for a long time, the opposition was trying to get us to just strip the definition completely from the bill and leave that up to the agency. And so we were concerned that we not only wouldn't pass the law, but it would get watered down such that we would just have to pull it and not move it forward this year until we could build up the support. But thankfully, and in large part because of the politics and the support, and again, the strength of our author and the co-authors I mentioned at the beginning, we held firm and we held strong on that and kept the bill actually a really strong bill, despite that pressure cooker process that it went through.
Bernadette Del Chiaro with Environmental Working Group, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let us know what you think about the ban of ultra-processed foods in California schools. You can always email us at siamak@californiainsider.com or comment. We read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siamak Khorrami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.